Thank you so much for joining me on Ethocast. I'm Eddie Francis, and joining me is one of my very cool colleagues. They call him Murph. Tom Murphy, who is the executive director of the Northeastern Greek Leadership Association. Hey man, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's been a long time no see.
Yeah, I know. It's been a long time since that crawfish etouffee and,
So true.
and gumbo lunch and
I'm
everything.
on lunch. Yeah, just last what Saturday. So
Yep, absolutely, man. So, in thinking about leadership and fraternity and sorority life, you are one of those people whose story I love to hear. I've heard you tell it a couple of times, and I think that because you have such a great story, you have a very deep connection to what fraternity life really means. And first of all, let's start with the story. How did you get into fraternity life?
well, I really didn't have a lot of choice. If you know as you know the story, I was literally born into it. Um,
That's my
so I
favorite
don't think
part of the
I don't think
story.
a lot of people can say that. Most people are introduced to it in their college years, or maybe have a family member who was a member and talks about their days. But I was literally born into it. My parents both attended Keene State College in southern New Hampshire, and back in the early '70s, and my dad joined the Phi Mu Delta chapter there, the new Omicron chapter, and I was the very first legacy. My parents had me while they were still in college. And so, yeah, when I was born, I was not brought to my home. I was brought to the fraternity house to be showed off.
Are you serious?
That is a
That
true
was the first
story.
step. That was
Yeah,
the first stop they made.
the first stop after the hospital was not to my home, was not, to the grocery store for mom to buy groceries. It was, let's go show Tom off to all the brothers at the Phi Mu Delta house. So yeah, and then we're going to do a little bit of a time skip here, but when you're very young, this isn't a major time skip. My father joins the Navy. We go away for 4 years, come back to the community, back to Keene State. My dad came back and happens to go on campus and meet with one of his mentors, who at that time, back then they called it the Dean of Men and the Dean of Women. So he meets with the Dean of Men, Ernie Gendron, and Ernie said that there was a job on campus as a residence hall director, and if he was interested, they'd love to hire him. And next thing we know, we're moving into campus into a residence hall. This is 1979. I'm not quite 7 years old yet, and my dad gets re-engaged with the fraternity and sorority community at Keene State, and then the chapters, obviously still active on campus, asked him to attend what we in my fraternity call a conclave, which is what we call our national convention. And my dad, they're like, we need an alumni to come up and represent us, and will you come up to Burlington, Vermont and join us? And he's like, sure. And he comes back the national vice president from that meeting. So it kind of gives you an idea of what was kind of going on in the world in the late 70s and fraternities and sororities. Kind of a hectic time. Phi Mu Delta had lost its national headquarters in '77, and was an all volunteer-driven organization at that point. And so anyone who showed any kind of spirit, any kind of initiative to get involved, was kind of pulled right in as soon as possible. And watch my dad from 1980, essentially, when that meeting took place, until 1990, when I graduated from high school, be away a lot to, as my mom will tell you, to kind of deal with all the problems in the campuses, put out fires and support what was going on. And, I'm not going to sound like a sad story here, but there were baseball games and things that my dad was away for because he was taking care of fraternity business.
Yeah.
And so when it got to, I used to go to the chapter house all the time. Growing up, we would sell hoagies for events or whatever we were trying to do. Dad always brought us over there because the guys were always felt compelled to buy candy from the national vice president's son. And by the time I'm in high school, I only applied to campuses that had chapters.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And my mind was absolutely set. I was going to go to Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
I think the story, and of course, when my parents see this video, they're going to correct me, I'm sure, on a couple items. But legends. If the legend's better than the story, go with the legend, right?
Yeah.
So the legend is that my grandfather had always wanted to go there. My paternal grandfather, and I had wanted to go there, and we had made arrangements. The college visits with your family, and my father said, I know this really great little school on the way there called Susquehanna University. I think you'd really like it. And I'm like, okay, Dad, yeah, sure, whatever. We're on the road. We get on campus. This is the day before we go to Penn State. We have tickets to the game against Alabama. And I'm walking around campus, and literally everyone's saying hello to me. I didn't go to school there. It was small. I think Susquehanna at the time had 1,200 students total, which was the same size as my high school.
Mm-hmm.
And we go to Penn State the next day. I stayed in the chapter house. The guys were kind of wined and dined me while I was there. We go to Penn State. I had a blast, but it was just too big. And I remember turning to my dad and just saying, Dad, I can't see. I felt like I was going to get swallowed up there. And I said, hey, do you mind if we go back to Susquehanna on the way home? I think I want to, they have this early decision program there that had all these benefits if you applied and were admitted. And I think that's what I want to do, but I want to be sure. And we did. We went back, and sure enough, I get home, and I only sent out, I was looking at several schools, but I only sent out one application at that time, which was the early decision for Susquehanna. And on December 17th, I got admitted in 1989, and I never applied anywhere else because as soon as you accepted that, there were all these, you got priority and registration, and priority was, all that. Now, mind you, Susquehanna, I think at the time, if I remember right, was about $18,000 a year, which today sounds pretty inexpensive. But in 1990 was a lot of money.
Back then, that was a chunk of change back then. Yeah.
And I'm like, how am I going to pay for this?
Yeah.
And got very fortunate that Susquehanna wanted to diversify their population. They had a lot of central Pennsylvania, North Jersey guys and gals. And I came from New Hampshire, and they were looking. I remember when we showed up, there were about 8 of us from New Hampshire. And we were kind of highlighted that, hey, look, we're kind of pulling in students from other places. So they worked really hard to get me there. Long story short, and I'm not getting this is a whole other program that we could do, but I ended up joining the chapter my senior year. I was a bio major. I got very engaged in my work. I was on a course to get a PhD in freshwater ecology, and in fact, ended up going to graduate school at the University of New Hampshire for that master's degree. While I'm there, I restart the Phi Mu Delta chapter at New Hampshire and get involved with Greek life there. And I'm like, I don't want to be a college professor. I think I want to work with fraternities and sororities. And by the grace of God, this guy, Andy Robeson, who became a really dear friend, in fact, just saw him in Denver this year at the FEA meeting, helped me find my first job. And I worked at Gustavus Adolphus College, a little college out in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Lost everything I owned in a tornado that leveled the campus my first year there. That's another whole conversation. Decided to come back east, where the worst thing I had ever encountered was a hurricane. Worked for a little period. The only time I didn't work with fraternities and sororities in my professional career was at Penn State Berks. I worked with Residence Life there, which was a branch campus of the Penn State campus. Then went to work at Lycoming College in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where today they're starting the Little League World Series. So that's world famous Williamsport. Shout out to them. And then ended up at Monmouth University on the Jersey Shore. And it was at that time that by that time I had been elected national president of Phi Mu Delta, and we were a sinking ship. The fraternity was going to go out of business, and here I am at the helm. Our then national vice president was Paul Kittle. Paul at the time was Auburn. A lot of people in the fraternity world know Paul. He's currently the vice chancellor for student affairs at the University of Houston. At that time, he was down at Auburn. And I turned to Paul. I said, Paul, would you bring Phi Mu Delta to your campus? And both of us unequivocally said no. He said, boy, that's not some pride right there. And we put together a plan in 2006 to stop being an all-volunteer organization and to have paid staff and to rebuild the organization. I was hired as the executive director. Paul took over as president. And within 2 to 3 years, we had turned the ship completely around and started growing. And I was Phi Mu Delta's executive director for 17 years. In that time, I opened 21 chapters. 2,500 men joined the organization, which constitutes about 23% of our current living alumni. All joined during the time I was president, or executive director. But I got burnt out. And it was time to, I used to tell people know when it was time as a leader to pass the torch. And I figured that was my time 2 years ago, following COVID and all that. And did that. resigned and was very fortunate that the stars were aligned. And NGLA had a failed search for an executive director, and I kind of came in and said, "Hey, I heard that you might be interested in hiring somebody. How about you consider me?" And
Mm.
2 years ago, they hired me to be NGLA's executive director.
The views expressed on Ethocast do not necessarily reflect the views of the hosts, guests, or any entities with which this podcast's participants are affiliated. Questions, comments, email eddie@eddiefrancis.com. In your executive director position, what were some of the problems that you saw that were common among fraternity life, and you just kept saying to yourself, this is something we need to work on, this is something I would love to address when I get the opportunity?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I will say I fell into a little bit of a trap. I served on a lot of boards that woke me up to. I used to think that Phi Mu Delta was like everybody else. And I know everybody likes to play this game of, oh, we're different. But Phi Mu Delta had, less than 20 chapters. By the time I left, and we really were different. And one of the things I try to do to answer your question was, how do we take advantage of that special niche? How does that make us a niche organization? So one of the problems I used to hate was, well, I'm a Phi Mu Delta, but I joined at Susquehanna and I joined at Penn State. So I'm like, wait a minute. We all shared the same ritual here. We all pledged ourselves. And, I haven't shared all the details, but like the three men that were the groomsmen in my wedding were all from three different chapters of Phi Mu Delta. They weren't guys from my chapter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I really embraced, as I got out of college, this idea. And part of it was my dad's involvement, right? But like, this is a national fraternity. We're not international, but you're in something bigger than a local chapter existence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so something I worked really hard on was getting high levels of engagement within our chapters. So guys were seeing each other 2, 3, even 4 times a year. And so we slowly started to eat away. Like by the time I left, nobody was saying, I am a Phi Mu Delta from so-and-so. It's just, I'm a brother. You're a brother. Welcome, brother.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that is something that I really am proud that we worked on and really have, facilitated. But again, I don't know if I could have done that if we were a 60 or 100 chapter organization. We were very lucky that I could bring in, for example, at our officers academy, the top 5 officers from every chapter and only have 100 guys in the room.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so what you saw is just like my example that I gave of 3 men not from my chapter standing up for me at my wedding. Those same relationships I started to see with others. So the best friends are cross-chapter friends. And I just thought that was really cool.
I think that is a beautiful thing because I see the same thing. I definitely have frat brothers who say, well, I was initiated at such and such university, so that's where my loyalty is. And I'm not so sure about the rest of the frat. And my response to that is, well, take those letters off because clearly you decided that your allegiance is to your chapter and not to the fraternity. So I'm not sure why you even have the fraternity letters on. And some people try to compensate it by putting their chapter letters on their chest. And then like, no, but it's still the same colors. So
and another conversation I used to have, especially as I was restarting chapters,
mm-hmm.
Who's going to do that? If you have a closed chapter, who's going to do that? Are you as an alumni group, as a bunch of guys, going to just go through the residence halls and recruit a bunch of guys? Like, it's the national organization that is the foundation of everything that we do. And I know that's a little self-serving when you're the executive director and you're an officer and you bought into the idea of national. But the reality is the local chapter is only really capable of empowering at the local level. It's never going to grow the organization beyond that. It's never going to grow the culture and all the things that come along. I mean, that's the other thing that I loved is as we grew, chapters started doing things that then became part of the national organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something that started at a local identity, but because of these friendships, spread very quickly in positive ways, not the negative. I can't think of a negative one right now, but really traditions. I'll give one, for example. We ended up adding a new ritual to our organization because one of our chapters did this as a way to emphasize the 3 pillars of our organization. It's called the 3 Pillars Ritual. I didn't participate in that when I was an undergrad. I have now done it as an alumnus and see it everywhere, and it's now part of the core of who we are as an organization. Just because I didn't do it at my chapter 30 years ago doesn't make it any less meaningful. So I think that's the beauty of recognizing that we are bigger than just a local chapter.
So let's talk about your capacity with NGLA. So with NGLA, when you take a look at the fraternity sorority life world, what kinds of issues are you seeing right now that continue to come up that, especially at the conference, you want to make sure that NGLA addresses?
Yeah, boy, the world is moving really fast. I think that's
Yeah.
the first thing I'm starting to realize. Maybe it's just a symptom of me getting older and thinking that, I was just talking with a friend this morning. There's a theory that your brain is kind of like a hard drive. So when you're
Hmm.
younger and it's not as filled up, that things feel slower. But as we get older, that hard drive fills, and so things feel like they're moving quicker. But
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
being said, um, it's funny. I just got accepted at AFA for a program that I'm going to do with Maria Smith on engagement, because one of the things that we're talking and seeing is this very transactional generation. And we all had some transactionalness when we were younger too. So this is not necessarily a new thing, but there's a lot. I see a lot more of it. A lot of the basis of the conversations I'm having with current members is this: I paid my dues. What am I getting tomorrow for it? Disconnected from the idea that this is an investment for a lifetime of, hopefully, a lifetime of engagement and the choices that you make. So there's a lot of those types of conversations going on. The reality is we should always be pruning. And what I mean by that is things like hazing prevention, sexual assault, mental illness. I don't ever see those subject matters going, us no longer talking about them. What I am seeing is that they're becoming more intersectional in other conversations. For the Northeast in particular, and I'm speaking to the Northeast, we're very challenged membership wise. The reality is that the enrollment cliff that everybody's been talking about that's coming is supposed to hit it is hitting the Northeast more than probably any other part. So you have less students going to college in the Northeast. One of the things I'm seeing, I think I talked to you about this when we were in Florida, is how many of my own friends from the Northeast whose kids are not even going to school in the Northeast. They're going to school at Alabama, Oklahoma, Florida. They don't want it. So what you're seeing is, unfortunately, in my opinion, some schools who are really struggling to find high quality students in the Northeast. And those are the students that we want to see join our organization. So there's a struggle. I think some schools are doing a great job, but they're the exception, not the rule right now in the Northeast. And so post COVID, I feel like we still haven't really kind of come out of this membership slump that by the way, started before COVID. I think I need that. I think that point needs to be made. I think we far too often blame COVID for our issues. COVID just kind of sped things up. It would just grease the wheel a little bit. The reality is I started to see some of these trends in about 2017, 2018, a full 2 to 3 years before COVID came in. But post COVID, there's some challenges. Now there's some groups who are doing a really great job with this. They've really leaned in. And where they're being successful, and where I want NGLA to be successful, is having genuine conversations about what engagement looks like, follow through on promises, and that's frankly always been a problem. What we advertise during recruitment does not always become what it is as a member. That has been a universal problem, but it's even more of a problem now, because if you don't quickly get into that transactional relationship, students are out. They're just out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other thing is, it's like a fire hose of information and involvement, right? Students have so much being thrown at them right now, and are high expectations, right? So they don't know quite how to do that. And the last thing I want to kind of address that I definitely see us needing to address at NGLA is, I think students are really afraid to fail right now. So
Yeah.
they don't put themselves in a position to fail because they're afraid to fail.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's on us. That's a societal thing that we did to them.
Yeah,
We created
I
that.
would agree with that. I would agree with that. I think it's the same thing. And, these are conversations I have with my own son who's in college, and how he is really hesitant sometimes to try things. He's gotten to the point where he's starting to try more things, but going into that, he was very hesitant, and it's common. Like his
Yeah.
friends were like that. But I am also hearing the same thing in fraternities and sororities. And I'm really glad you brought up that point that this started to happen before COVID.
Yeah.
Because I think we have gotten comfortable saying, oh, well, it's COVID. COVID really disrupted a lot of things. But I'm
And the
glad
problem
you
with that
pointed that
too is,
out.
right. The other problem with that too is, oh, once we just get some distance from COVID, this will all return to some
Yep.
sense of before. And I don't know. The world has changed.
Hmm.
And that's scary for all of us because that's a complete paradigm shift. And when paradigms shift, it's hard to figure out what you're going to do.
Yep.
But the way
Yep.
I see it very freeing. Like, okay, if it's a paradigm shift, then I can't really fail if I try.
That's a good point. I love the way I love the way you think of it. Because now the road is wide open for us to try another direction.
Correct.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, especially as someone who is in the kind of leadership position that you in, what is your big dream for fraternity and sorority life?
Oh, wow. That's again, you're asking really good questions today, Eddie, which is what I would expect from somebody doing a podcast. But I think
I'm using that big Loyola brain of mine.
and this is said by other people. I'm going to steal something that, Pete Smith-Heisler said all the time when he was at the NIC, and I agreed with him, and I will continue till my dying breath. I believe there is no better developmental engagement, college engagement organization on campus today, when done correctly, those are the key words, than a fraternity and sorority experience.
Mm.
So in my world is I want there to be healthy, safe, values-driven organizations that allow the opportunity for all quality students to be engaged in. My dream is, look, I recognize fraternity and sorority is not for everybody, and that's okay too. By the way, I'm not suggesting, but I think a little differently here. I've gotten into actually some recent arguments about this. Like, I'm somebody who does believe that brotherhood and sisterhood is something that should be given away.
Hmm. Okay.
It's a gift. And it's a gift that was meant to be given away. And by the way, that is not my phrase. That is Sam Waltermeyer, who replaced me at Phi Mu Delta, came up with that when he was an undergrad. And I've completely bought into that. And yes, should we make sure that people live our values and they share those values? Yes, I'll check all those boxes. And I'm not suggesting that we give invitations to every person who comes through the door. That's not the conversation I'm having. What I'm having is the conversation that says, if somebody shares our values, there should be no question that that person joins us. There should be no question that we invite that person to join us. And there should be no question that that person is able to identify that they should join us by the things that we do, not by the letters we're wearing, but the things that we do on campus on a regular basis. There should be men and women going, that is what I want because I share those values. And gosh darn it, if that's the case, then we should be sharing that as a gift.
That is so, and I've actually had this thought lately, with the conversations that I've had with folks about Greek life is that what we do, I kind of think the same thing. What we do isn't just for us. What we do is to be an example to communities. And so when I take a look at some of the, chaos that might happen in an organization, at work or someplace like that, I kind of chuckle to myself and say, in fraternity life, we have this part figured out.
Right?
And this is how we handle this so that everybody can move on and do what we need to do because we need to move on from this problem. And I do think there are a lot of opportunities for us in fraternity and sorority life to serve as shining examples to communities. So I love this concept that, we should give it away. And I think there are ways to do that with us without us feeling as if we're losing our souls.
Right. I'm not saying that you undermine the core values of the organization. That's not what I'm suggesting. And I've had that challenge to be like, well, not everybody should join. That's not the conversation I'm having.
Right. No, that's not it.
It's
Right.
the conversation is, somebody should know exactly that I'm a Phi Mu Delta, not because I'm wearing a letter or the badge on my chest, but because of what they consistently see me do regularly throughout the community. And then they should be able to say, I share that and I want to be with you and join you in doing that. And then I need to be open to welcoming them in through the door, So this is an area where I think the Masons do it right, So
I would agree with that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I
yeah,
would agree that
I've gotten
Masons do
arguments
that
there
well.
too that their numbers are down and all that, and I think they could do a little bit better job of advertising their values. But I do think the idea of I know a lot of my friends who are Masons and I ask them how they became a Mason. They'll say, well, I have other people, my grandfather, I watched them, and I said, I want to emulate that. And the idea is, ask one to join one. I think that can become the root of what we do.
Outstanding. Tom Murphy, he is the executive director of the Northeast Greek Leadership Association and a great speaking colleague. Hey, man, thank you so much for joining me on
Thanks for having me.
Ethocast.
Yeah, always. This was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Ethocast is a 4-hour edification limited series. If you like what you heard, like and follow this podcast for more leadership insights for your fraternity or sorority chapter. To find out how you can bring followership to leadership or the Black Greek Success Program to your campus or a campus near you, email today, eddie@eddiefrancis.com. Until next time, spread brotherly and sisterly love wherever you go.